Straight Talk Live, exploring human, digital, and social transformations. Welcome to Straight Talk Live. My name is Rick Snyder. I'm one of the co-hosts of this amazing show where we really dive into the depths of human, digital, and social transformation. And we're very much on the heels of our first year anniversary. If you think about a year ago today, where were you? What was going on in your life? Was there any change, any sudden changes going on that you're aware of? That's exactly why we started this show. As you probably heard us say before, Af and I were not satisfied by the conversations that were happening around the world in all the key sectors, from the unemployment crisis to education to the future of technology and the future of work. And that's exactly what we're going to be double clicking on today, is the future of work. What is that looking like on the cutting edge around the whole world? So I am the CEO of Invisible Edge, and I'm the author of Decisive Intuition, and proud to co-host this with Af Malhotra. Af, take it away.
Thank you, Rick. A pleasure again to be on this fantastic show. We have a tremendous guest today. So I'm, of course, the co-creator of STL, Straight Talk Live, an important part of our lives now, actually. In fact, Rick, you and I. And I'm also the co-founder of Growth Enabler and part of a whole bunch of other not-for-profit initiatives. Today is, you would have heard us talk about the future of work in the past. Today is something quite different, because our guest today is going to talk about a business model and a commercial setup that has impacted the way globalization has happened in the world. And it's a seriously important issue and business, I guess, because of the pandemic. And after the pandemic, you've heard us talk about the death of globalization, or the resurgence of a new globalism, or localization, or the morphing of globalization and everything else that goes with it. This business model and what our guest has managed to do with her brand and her vision, I guess, is pretty compelling. So you've got to listen really carefully, and you must ask some very difficult questions. So I'm going to take the ball, the cricket ball. I'm going to throw it right at you, Rick, and let's crack on with the proceedings.
It's a good thing I don't know what a cricket ball is. Just kidding. I did live in India for a year. So speaking of globalization, so we want to welcome our special guest, Nicole Sahin, to our show. Nicole, welcome to Straight Talk Live.
Hi. I love this podcast, and I love what you guys are doing. So thank you.
Thank you. And as we know, you're the founder and CEO of Globalization Partners. Can you give us just a little bit of your background to start with? Just how did you get here? What led you to this seat that you're holding now? And tell us a little bit about your company as well.
Sure. So just to tell you a little bit about myself and kind of what I'm doing in the world, to give your listeners some context. So Globalization Partners is a company that has fundamentally changed the way the world works. So whenever a company wants to hire employees in another country, so whether it's the UK or India or Malaysia or anywhere, historically they had to go figure out how to set up payroll in that country, how to follow all the employment laws in that country, how to set up a company in that country. And it was a huge limiting factor in companies being able to employ people around the world. So just to give an idea, it takes maybe 3 months to a year to set up a company in another country, which would be required to do before hiring people in that country. With our platform, what we've built is that instead of companies doing all of that, we have the existing legal and software infrastructure set up in 187 countries. The customer identifies the talent and then put the employee on our payroll in that country. So basically, the company avoids having to deal with all the legal, tax, and HR issues associated with international expansion. They can hire a global team working for them within a couple hours of identifying talent. So from a business perspective, it's like totally changed the game. It's a big company. We are currently about 400 people. We're trying to add another 500 internal employees this year. We're growing at the speed of light. Of course, we think we're the next Zoom or equivalent. But the reason it matters goes back to what Af was saying, which is the unemployment crisis. And if you think about jobs are the most important thing anyone, anywhere can have. And previously, before 10 years ago and before the pandemic especially, people were really limited in their thinking about who they could hire. And now the idea that anyone can hire the best and brightest people anywhere in the world is not only good for companies, but it's really good for people. And it's wonderful if you can hire the best and brightest talent in a place like India, because it helps develop those economies. Instead of bringing that talent to the United States to work, we have a shortage of over 1 million engineers a year in the United States. Companies hiring that same talent in country, it's good for the person's family, it's good for that local economy, and it ultimately works to eliminate poverty and help the rest of the world develop more rapidly and more quickly. Besides my work with Globalization Partners, which to me is really about giving job opportunities to everyone everywhere, and we find that inspiring about our work. I also work with multiple organizations to eliminate extreme poverty that are focused on eliminating extreme poverty. We can talk about jobs, but the reality is that not everybody has access to the digital economy. So really bright people have had access to opportunity and education. Whether they come from developing worlds or not, they can have access to jobs, great jobs through the digital economy. But there's some people in our world who just don't have access and the same access to opportunity yet, because there's a lot of people who don't have clean water. If you imagine during the pandemic, literally not having water to wash your hands, that is a sad state of the world. And so one thing I'm really passionate about in my nonprofit endeavors is to help people who just, we need to level the playing field for everyone everywhere. We have a long way to go, but one of the Millennium Goals is by the end of 2030 to eliminate extreme poverty. The organizations I work through doing that are School the World. We've built over 100 schools throughout Central America in rural and indigenous communities. Water for People, which works on bringing water to everyone everywhere throughout Latin America and very rural African communities. And Give Directly, which is a particularly cool organization that what they do is they have this thing where they're literally dropping cash to people in very poor, very rural, and very underprivileged communities to let those people solve their own problems through direct donations.
Yeah. Wow,
So
that's amazing.
It's amazing what you've been doing and how much passion and energy, and you've been at this for a while, it seems like, too. I'm curious, obviously you're handling one of the greatest pain points that you mentioned around the legal complications that give everyone headaches, and even just all the international complexities of hiring and every country's laws around that. I used to live in France, and France alone has a very unique set of laws around employmentship that's so different to any other country. What was it about for you that inspired you to see that gap? Did you go through some personal struggle around that yourself, or what happened where you said, you know what, I want to address that issue?
Yeah. I always thought, I guess first I was an entrepreneur. I set up a business in the Caribbean, which was around outsourcing yoga and retreats when I was very young, early 20s. And for me, the hard part was figuring out, just how to run a business. Like, I was really good at the marketing and operations side, but the tax legal stuff was confusing being in a foreign country, or even just as an entrepreneur in the first place. If you multiply that times international, I subsequently went and got an MBA and then started with a company that we were basically a drop-in consulting team for high growth companies. So for example, Tesla called and they'd say, hey, we want to hire 2 sales employees in each of 18 countries, and we need to get it set up and running in 12 months. Our team was like the drop-in team who would go set everything up from an HR, legal, and tax perspective. And the problem with that business was that our way of making it scalable was that we would drop in and do it because we were the team who had been there, done that, and done it before. But nevertheless, we could never get it done as quickly or as easily as customers wanted to. And I had set up like 100 companies in the UK for 100 different clients, set up 60 companies in Brazil for 60 different customers. And finally, I just thought, oh my God, if I could just set up one company in each country and give all of our clients access to it, I would have a much more scalable business model, and our customers would be so much happier. And it would really revolutionize the way the world does business. We have done it. When I first started, it was about 10 years ago. This was not considered a legally valid business model. At this point, PwC, EY, big companies are our partners and refer a lot of business to us because they believe and trust in the compliance underpinnings of our business. We really worked hard to make sure that, from getting government approvals and making sure everything is extremely compliant, that we're ultimately providing a really solid service to our customers.
Nicole, I have a question for you on the. It's like going down a path that we must tackle with you because it's come up in our show. So, permanent employment, which I think is fantastic, having a job and a job that you love, of course, because a lot of people don't love what they do, and having a vehicle or a setup where you get, your salary coming in, and frankly, the employee doesn't care. How they're paid, but they need to be paid. The structure is what you provide, and then the sort of the juxtaposition there is gig economy. So this whether that's by choice, I'm almost sort of semi-convinced that the gig economy is a great thing, but it wasn't by choice, right? It has benefits. There's many benefits, but it also requires a lot of maturity, one as an individual level, to be able to detach yourself from the regularity of an income, right? Because gig economy income today is not consistent, predictable income today.
Right.
So talk us through what the gig economy trend means to you, and it's not about whether it's going to impact your business. That may positively or negatively impact. We don't know, but talk us through these two forces and what are you seeing on the ground? Because you speak to so many people in so many different countries. What is your observation post pandemic in particular?
I think that's a really good point. I guess I feel like from my perspective, the gig economy is somewhat separate because it tends to be, as you mentioned, a kind of like a lower end of the employment market. I mean, these are people who are kind of like they're not looking for the security usually. I mean, most people who are professional employees and professionals and have families to support, they want the regularity of knowing that they have a paycheck coming in and knowing that they're going to be protected according to employment laws. Gig work is really a way of navigating around the employment laws, and it works for some people, and I think that's wonderful. But I'd say the vast majority of our customers and the employees who work for them, they want the protection of employee laws. And like we can say people don't care how they get paid, but they want the security of knowing their payroll is coming in on time. They're going to get their unemployment benefits if anything goes wrong. That they have the protections that we as people have fought for over the last 150 years to make employment a win-win solution between both the employer and the employee. Whereas 150 years ago, it's like, yeah, you just paid somebody, you can fire them anytime you want. We did a lot of work to get these employment protections in place around the globe, and it benefits both the employee and the employer. The gig economy, the gig economy is anything from a lorry driver in India, who's really struggling to make ends meet, to an Uber driver. And people do it, and it's a great way of making ends meet, but it's not, doesn't give the security to some people the way that they want. There's a lot of people who like it because they're doing other things, or it's a privileged position to not need security. But more power to those people who are in that situation, because it gives them the freedom and flexibility they want.
Yeah. And I guess a lot of what you're doing is because it's a global setup, like 187 countries. So I assume, just for the benefit of the listeners, that you have 187 structures, companies all over the world. And these companies, they're called X, for example, or whatever they're called. These companies become vehicles or channels for any business of any size to use as a route to payroll. Right, so you don't have to you don't have the setup costs, legal costs. Time takes a lot of time to get your head around another country. I mean, I speak from experience because I've built a bunch of companies out in India and so on, and I'm UK based. But again, there's a big drive on 2.0, 3.0 globalization, where it's going to be all virtual. Right, so the opportunity to go do a recce and look at the location and go chat to people, that's not going to happen. So with why I'm setting the scene is the second part of my question is, how are you using remote working and virtual technology in your business now to as an enabler, perhaps?
Oh yeah, we were set up for remote work ultimately in most cases, even before the pandemic started, just because of the vast global nature of our workforce. So I guess basically, I mean, it's worth noting that besides the legal infrastructure, we have an AI-based software that's built on top of our legal infrastructure. So for example, whenever a customer wants to hire an employee in Singapore, they have the same questions over and over again. You know, like you said, how do I employ this person? Like, is this person care more about this benefit or that benefit? You know, do they want a health insurance or do they need a pension? And so basically our software guides the customer through that, articulates like negotiating with the employee and things like what type of benefits to offer. And then the customer drops into the employment contract the terms that they want to offer to the candidate, choosing from our pre-selected benefits plans. So it kind of, you know, uses all of that. I'd say in terms of a digital remote working tool, yeah, I mean, I guess any type of software, any type of Zoom, that type of thing, we're using all of the above, less in the digital universities through online training programs and that type of thing. I think that's just table stakes for any organization that is going global in today's economy, because you can't have, right now with the pandemic, you can't have people flying around the globe all the time.
Yeah, yeah. Do you also get involved in hiring? So like, is it like do you do turnkey recruitment as well? Or is it just give me the recruit, pick them, and then you can put them through my structure?
Yep. So we do not personally get involved in recruiting, but in Q3 July, we actually are planning to launch a recruiting platform through our software that plugs clients into recruiting, best of class recruiting around the globe, just to make it easier. Because I think the number one barrier to going global, it was the legal, HR, and tax issues just being so complicated. Yeah. So now that we've flattened those barriers, it's like, what's the next barrier? And I think the next thing is people, it makes you nervous. You know, it's always like, if I hire somebody in the UK, how do I know? Like, I haven't trained them in my headquarters office. How do I know that they're going to carry the company mantle and care about this business as much as I do? And what I found is like, because we did this ourselves. You know, at first we hired our headquarters team in a few key locations, people that we knew. Of course, you expand beyond the people you know to build a business pretty quickly, you know, your own network. And then we had to start hiring people we didn't know in countries all over the globe. Yeah, of course. And so basically, what I found is that when you hire local people in country, they, first of all, you interview and meet them and feel the same bond through them through video technology that you would interviewing somebody in person. It's not 100%, but you can get pretty darn close. We've hired over 200 people, probably 300 people, I think, actually, since the beginning of the pandemic that we have never met in person for our own internal team. They have, and like people can take the ball so much further by being local talent in country. It also opens up, you know, it can open up new markets for companies. So new salespeople around the globe that they weren't planning to target this country or that country until a different time, can change the cost structure of a company. We have a lot of our customers are hiring people in like the South, whereas they used to hire all their employees in the Bay Area or Boston, or we have people using it for cost cutting, you know, means. So for example, we have companies that are headquartered in London who are hiring teams in Eastern Europe and other locations where they can hire the same talent at a lower cost and save some of their higher cost jobs or in-market jobs for different types of talent. So I'd say this is just completely exploding right now.
Yeah, and you're really hitting on a good point around trust. And this is something that I've come up against a lot, working with a lot of different executives and companies right now that are going through similar challenges around, well, how do we trust and hire key people that we've never met? We've never had that somatic experience in the room of really that feeling, having that real handshake and having that, or even if today's it's like elbow to elbow, but even just having that like in-person connection where you really get that sense and all the nonverbal communication that happens in that experience, or you go out to lunch, you get to know each other in a different way. And yet people are having to make these decisions. They're forced to by the circumstances today. And I'm seeing some companies that are still reticent about the trust around that. And how do we let in some of those key stakeholders into our strategic conversations versus the ones that are just getting, hey, this is adaptability. This is today's world. This is what we have to do. Anything that you would want to say to that for anyone listening in our audience right now who might be in that situation where they're still perhaps struggling around the trust issues around remote work and what have you?
I guess my main thing is empathy, because I've been there and kind of worked through it. But I guess my words of wisdom are, first necessity is a mother. You're going to have to do it anyway, and all
Yeah.
your competitors are doing it. And like, if you don't, you're kind of behind the curve. So I guess from a just tactical perspective, take the leap. But from an emotional perspective, which is obviously critical and important, I mean, just in my experience, again, like I have hired the most magnificent people that I've learned so much from all over the globe that have blown my mind with their brilliance, creativity, dedication, and ingenuity. And people I've literally never met in person. When I finally did meet them in person, it was a joy and like a lot of fun, but it wasn't like somebody came out of the closet, and like, like a surprise. And unfortunately, you can get you can actually pick up, I think, the same negative vibes, or this person's going to be a troublemaker through the interview process that you do virtually as compared to, and as you do in person. And I think ignore that at your peril, internationally or anywhere.
Yeah. So when you first saw Af right now, were you thinking troublemaker? total troublemaker. You were right. Your intuition is spot on.
Yeah.
She was like this. She's like, this guy's a genius. I was just messing with her. I was thinking, maybe there'll be a time when we'll meet someone virtually, and then we'll be underwhelmed when we meet them physically.
Oh, that happens. That can happen for sure.
Yeah, I'm sure.
So one of the coolest things I think in your position right now is that you're getting to really see a lot of the trends of technology and how that interfaces around the whole world and how different countries are adapting to the current times. What are some of the things that you're seeing on the leading edge there, just in how the future of work is really transforming as we speak and how it's affecting society as we know?
Oh my God. Well, fabulous question. And it is exciting. I mean, I think we are, I always felt like we were at the forefront of futurism, technology, and people integrating around the globe from a cultural perspective, like people getting to know each other so much better. But now the pandemic really propelled us all forward about 10 years. And in terms of actually having to adopt some of the technology that makes remote and digital work and global work possible. So I guess the trends that I would predict, one, I think, is the birth of deeper global empathy, and I think that when you see people around the globe who look different from you, and they're your colleagues every day, and you bond with them and they're working as hard as you are, and you're all working on some shared collaborative mission, but then you see something that on the news would have scared the daylights out of you. And you realize this person is human and a wonderful person just like you, who cares about their family just like you. That really breaks down that barrier of not caring about that person's life or being able to go to war, for example, with that country. So just to give you an example that I like to use, I had a customer in Dallas who had an employee in Qatar that they worked with every day. It was a salesperson, and they had a very good relationship with this person. And one day the guy's wife walked by on the video call, and she was covered head to toe with her face covered. Mm-hmm. And he told me, it freaked him out at first because, he thought that people who forced women to be covered, or countries where women were covered, were disrespectful of women. And I don't know what he thought, but basically I'm sure you can imagine. And yet this person talked so lovingly about his wife and his family. He picked his kids up from soccer every day, and he was very obviously a family man. So it was just that jarring moment that the expectation of what I thought about people like that versus my colleague and friend, it kind of broke down that barrier of, so that's one thing. Okay, it's like this birth of understanding what other people's lives are like, and that we're more alike than we are different. Another thing, more tactically, I would say that cities, people like living in cities because it's fun, but in the future, I think people will live in the cities not because they have to be close to work, but because they want to. And people will kind of, the spread of the wealth all over the globe. So the rise of the rest. So the rise of the South, where people want to live because it's warm and people are nice. The rise of places like Ohio and Cincinnati. The rise of Mexico, where there's 13% of the population is completely fluent in English and highly educated, and very, very capable of doing as good of work as many people in the United States, where jobs are also going to come, and that those jobs, the money from those jobs will stay in those local economies and help help stimulate other economies besides just the Silicon Valley and Boston.
Mm-hmm. Can you go back to the global empathy piece, because I think that's quite an interesting one. What is it about virtual then that you believe is different to before we were doing this? Mm-hmm. Is it speed? Is it the instant nature of working with so many different people at the same time? Like, look at this. I mean, we represent 3 continents, give or take. And who, our audience is global. I mean, we have people from all over the place. So multiple continents being represented on one call. So what is it about that example when you talked about the chap from Dallas and then the guy from Qatar and so on? What is that? What's your view on it? Why does that happen? And how will it happen more? What do we need to do something, or is it our responsibility to step up and make that first point become more real?
Oh, I think it's happening. I think it's happening already. So I don't think there's anything we need to do, but key things I would say, key things that we can, I think it's going to happen whether we want it to or not, but it's happening. But key things that we can do to make it more human, I think having video on all, so the reason it's happening now, let's start there, is because companies used to have to hire within the commuting radius of their office location. So if everybody has to go to the office every day, you have to do that. Also, everybody gets the same 1 inch of screen space on a Zoom call. And I personally have loved that, because our all hands meetings used to be me talking to our Boston office and streaming to the rest of the world. And I was talking mostly to my Boston team and seeing their reactions. Now everybody, from the most junior person in the company to my executive VP gets the same 1 inch of Zoom space. And I can see all their faces. They all have the same opportunity to ask questions. It's the democratization of the workforce, not everything going up through this hierarchical chain or geo-located chain. In terms of how do we make the empathy greater, and personally, I think that ties a lot to the company culture. And what makes work rewarding for people is that human connection. One policy we have is video on all the time. I don't think we're unique in that, but that's critical to improving cross-cultural bonding. And let's see, other things in that. I mean, it's just like team events. I mean, things like people sharing a little bit of their life from around the globe. I mean, we had a woman from Singapore who posted a video and she said, "This is my neighborhood. All the apartment buildings in Singapore look the same. And it has to do with the way our government started and all these things." But just to see a little video snap of her life and like how she lives in the noodle shop where she goes for dinner, with her family sometimes, it was like, oh, this is really cute. It was like virtual traveling, but also getting to know somebody's life in a way that's really cool and unique.
I've seen this too, Nicole, where even the team that I'm on right now, it started with this idea of MTV Cribs. If anyone remembers back in the day where MTV would show you your house, and you get to, a flash of some celebrity and everyone would get to see how they live. So we started doing that internally where you get to show your Zoom, computer around your house if you want to do it. It's optional, but you get to show like, hey, here's my living situation. You get to know more about each person you're working with more closely. Or as you're saying, if you want to go down the neighborhood or something like that, or the local coffee shop, and how that does bring people closer together beyond just the screen. You're seeing the cultural milieu that they come from. And so that is bringing people closer together in ways that we couldn't have done before in the same way.
That's a great point. We'll steal that point on the real estate, the square, because actually it's a quite an important point, because if you think about cultural hierarchies, they're usually unsaid, right? And even, you make a point about the broadcasting versus interactivity, but actually this square, it's the same size. There is an inference there. There is an inference, clear inference there that I belong, and then I get the same real estate, the same video space as my boss's boss's boss, and that's a very good point. The other thing I think, to your point, and we'll practice a little bit more, is in the old days when the boss used to call the team members to his or her house, it was generally your direct reports, right? And there was a certain cluster in the hierarchy. Okay. Oh, come over to my place and let's play some golf, or I don't know, I've got a boat at the back. Just totally generalizing, but you know what I'm saying. And now, of course, by the way, that's a great idea, the Cribs one. That's a really, really good idea. You sort of break all those barriers down, and everyone's welcome to the party. right? To a large extent.
That's nice.
Yeah.
Now, if we don't mind, let's take a look at the other side of the coin, because it's obviously there's so many positives to globalization. There's so many conveniences and barriers are getting broken down. But there's also always another side of the story and other impacts. What are some of the downsides that you're seeing for cultures, for countries, for employees around globalization, around the digital evolution? What are you seeing also that speaks to the other side of the story?
Sure. Well, I guess the big thing, and I'm curious your perspective as well, but I think some people don't like working from home. You know, like they struggle with the emotional well-being of not being surrounded by people. And we're social people by nature. And some people did get all of their, kind of social interaction and a lot of their mental wellness and well-being from work. So especially for single people living alone, especially during a pandemic, especially for people who live in cold climates that they can't spend a lot of time outside, I think that has been challenging for some people. Other things, I mean, I like some places that have been traditionally really high rent, urban locations, like companies probably don't care if people are in those locations or not anymore. Salaries there might level out, rather than continually increasing. But on the flip side, I guess rent's going down too, from what my friends have told me. So I'm not seeing a ton of downside, but I think the mental wellness and some of the bonding virtually can be a challenge for people.
How's your setup changed in at Globalization Partners, or has it changed since the pandemic?
It's interesting because you would have thought that we would have been totally remote in the first place, but I guess I always wanted people in hub office locations previously. So we were hiring, for example, we have big offices in Boston, San Diego, Mexico City, Galway, Ireland, just various locations with the idea that people should sit side by side for training. By force, with the pandemic, we had to shut down our actual office location to keep people safe. And we've ascertained that going totally remote is probably fine. So we haven't formally announced it yet, but it looks like we'll be heading into a remote workplace. I will say I believe in work from home, not work from anywhere. Some companies have a work from anywhere policy. I personally don't think you can be as productive working from an RV in a national park as you can from a stable home location. So we ask our employees to stay from home. And there's also, legal issues. People vagabonding around the globe all the time is not my ideal. That's unfortunately, I don't think that's a stable employment situation. So yeah, we have we're implementing work.
It takes I started, I don't know about you, but when I came out of the corporate 7 years ago, I was forced to work in a I ran my own startup, multiple startups, and you're forced to work in a virtual environment on the back of a laptop, and you have to sort of find a way to be more mature. Over time, you become a bit more mature with productivity, right? Because being effective with with just you and without a team in a virtual environment is not easy. It's really not everyone's ball game. So I think there's a level of empathy and cutting some people's slack, because it's going to take time for people to go through the transition phases of what it means to be productive without human beings around them constantly. So I do think it's a great economic model. It's probably a good thing to do. There's some benefits, but a lot of support is required, because there will be mental strain and stress imminently, because I do think that's part of it. Do you feel the same? I mean, is that what you're seeing as well with your people and your wider teams?
Yeah, I mean, I think it also depends on the culture. I mean, I know like our Mexico City team and our India team have told me they really are eager to get back to the office. I'm not sure why, but I think it has to do. Some people are and some people aren't, but I think it has to do with the just like they're more used to being even more social than we are. Like our India team would sit down to lunch together every day and have tea at 4. These things don't happen in the Boston office. You could walk in the office and barely talk to people all day. I think what people want, ultimately the best thing, and probably the best thing for everybody, is flexibility and kind of honoring the fact that people have been super productive from home. So asking them to go every single day to an office from 9 to 5 is, first of all, it's not going to be super healthy for the employee or the employer, because the employees aren't going to want to do it. And from the employer's perspective, like, who wants to be the least popular employer in the world? It's going to make companies really hard to recruit, because Nobody wants to do something, be told to do something just literally so that eyeballs can be on them all day long.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Makes sense.
Yeah. I have a question that you brought up for me around parity. When we talk about, you made an example that sometimes there's a company, let's say in London, and they want to hire in Eastern Europe because it's going to be a cheaper labor force. How do you see parity changing over time? And what I'm asking about is, if I'm, let's say, a skilled worker in Turkey, let's say, or somewhere like that, and I'm being hired by a company in London, I might say, wait a minute, I get the cost of living is different, and you're paying for talent, and my talent is as good or if not better than the person in London. So how do you see that changing over time as the world becomes more global in these ways, around parity, around salary, and those kinds of things?
That's a very interesting question. And I think a lot of HR professionals and everybody's trying to figure that out. So I would say at this point, we are still seeing people use geography as the grounding point for hiring people. But I do think in some locations, so in highly sought after roles, highly sought after talent. So for example, executives and executives coming from certain companies, and also engineers and tech people. I think they're kind of calling the shots these days. And what we are starting to see, we haven't seen it yet, is more technologists saying, look, we want higher salary. I mean, there's a lot of engineers, and like India is known for having a lower cost talent pool. I know plenty of people paying engineers, what I would call European salaries. And I don't think that's unusual, and I think it's right, because there is such a shortage of engineering talent. And if those people can get those jobs, they're going to do it. So I guess the question is what becomes, what are the jobs of the future that's considered highly talented? So there's obviously technology, obviously executives, though that game's already being played, and I think we'll continue to see it played out. And then beyond that, English language skills are critical, but they're not scarce at this point.
Do you also have an operation in China, or is that a market you don't touch?
Yes.
You do. Okay. Do you see, and we talk about the East, a lot, East, West, and digital a lot. Do you see any, what are your observations on the ground between, the Eastern markets, Japan, China, India? What are you seeing post-pandemic? Is it sort of similar behaviors? You see response to the employment market being different?
Actually, it's quite similar. So now, of course, my viewpoint is mostly high growth companies that want to hire the best talent in the world, no matter where it sits. And we're seeing that coming out of China too. I mean, China's had a ton of venture capital and private equity capital flow into those headquartered companies. In terms of the local market, there's tons of small businesses in China too. I think the view of labor is different. From what my Asian colleagues have said, European and North American companies really care a lot about company culture. We see that a lot in the high growth, professionally managed companies that are backed, simply headquartered and based out of Asia, because they have the same issue of wanting to retain people and build a strong tech company culture. But sometimes they don't care as much. It's not as culturally part of the thing. It's not as ingrained.
I'm with you. Interesting. Okay. We have some questions that have come in as well, Rick. Should we pick one of them and then come back to a few others later?
Sure. And this is a good moment where, if you're listening live on Facebook, YouTube, on a live Zoom call, wherever you may be in the world, in this global conversation, please send in your questions right now that we can ask Nicole around the future of work. So if you have any questions for yourself, for your teams, where things are going, now's the time to ask. So one of our questions coming from Facebook, Nicole, is you talked about the benefits to the international worker, their family, the local economy, et cetera. What are some of the downsides or concerns, ethically or otherwise, that you see when companies are hiring based on cost-cutting measures?
Sure. Okay, that's an important question. I'm personally not an advocate of terminating employees in higher cost jurisdictions and backfilling in new locations. Laying people off is just over cost. I think it's short-sighted personally, because I can't speak to every CEO's situation, but basically I think you lose a lot of the ingrained talent, business knowledge, and a lot that comes with those people. And it's also just so emotionally draining for the organization. I can't even imagine going through that. But I will say, I think that they're, hiring people from scratch. Okay, so maybe you have a high cost jurisdiction, you want to keep those employees, transfer one of those employees to move to a new location and hire and train people in a lower cost jurisdiction. I just think like you can have a multiplicative effect without laying off people. Like take your highly talented people who have been great in the organization for a long time and leverage their expertise to train people in lower cost jurisdictions. So I think it's just kind of the way companies go about it. I do think hiring people in low cost jurisdictions can be ethical because unfortunately, companies who don't think about it in the first place of what is the appropriate cost jurisdiction for the talent we're hiring. So for example, companies that hired 400 cold callers in San Francisco Bay Area and are paying them $150,000 a year, that was a stupid business decision. Pick a lower cost jurisdiction in the first place so that you don't have to fire 400 people later. Hire them in, Costa Rica or something where it's $20,000 a year, $30,000 a year, and then you have a very scalable organization that you don't have to make those ethical decisions later. I guess my viewpoint as a CEO is always to provide good jobs for everyone everywhere. So we try, when we offer benefits to people on behalf of our customers, we give them good jobs. Like we recommend our clients paying at a certain percentile. People who speak English in market, in these foreign markets, for example, are going to be at the higher end of the pay scale anyway. Companies are sometimes surprised because if they were just to hire an engineer, market research in Mexico would say you can hire an engineer for $13,000. Can you hire a good English speaking engineer for that amount? No, and that doesn't include all the other costs that come along for the ride that aren't in that base salary number. But I guess basically it's about being a good ethical employer anywhere the company goes and paying people appropriately for that market. My philosophy is to pay people well. And I think that's important.
Yeah, I'm appreciating that. And I would imagine you leading the charge out there in the world, that's going to be very important for you to practice what you preach at your own business at Globalization Partners. And I know I've read that in your bio around, it's really important to create an environment that employees love to work. And so what are some of the things that you have found been successful in your own company, even of creating that kind of culture that people are so engaged in, want to be part of, become your greatest champions for?
Yeah, I think the multiple things. One is respecting people and being grateful for their work, and giving people the chance to shine. So we're not big into telling people how to do things or telling people to act like robots. We try to automate things that are just that boring day-to-day work that could be done by anyone, and really letting people unleash their creativity. And we trust our employees, so it's about saying, here's the parameters in which you can make decision, but ultimately I trust you, so delegating authority to people to make the right decisions on behalf of the business. I think the tone is super important. It's so funny. We had to do like sexual harassment and discrimination training for legal reasons in our Boston office. And I remember this person came in and was training the team, and I was like, oh my God, we don't have this type of behavior here, because we would have fired this person. Like if somebody actually acted like this, they would have been out the door day one. So I think it really is critical to hire the right people and hire people who buy into the vision. So for example, in hiring country managers in locations that are traditionally more patriarchal, I was very clear to have a conversation with that person before we hired and say, look, you're going to have to hire a diverse team. How do you feel about that? Do you support our philosophy around diversity, promoting people equally, regardless of their, it's not necessarily race in some countries, but it could be like certain types of status or gender. And so just promoting that throughout the organization. So I guess it's ultimately around creating a very human-centric, respectful environment that is efficient and effective without a lot of politics, getting things done and all moving towards a common goal, but appreciating when people do.
Fantastic.
Sounds great.
One more question's come in around startups, because of course the startup revolution is reignited again after the pandemic. There's so much money in the market all over the world, in fact. So the question really is, how does a startup use what you do? So if they want to go to market in another country or another jurisdiction?
Yeah, we have a ton of startups. I mean, I guess it depends how you define startup. but I would say most of our customers are professionally backed or venture backed. But I guess the main thing is just being able to access talent anywhere, like to be able to hire that killer engineering team in Ukraine or Russia or wherever. One benefit of our platform is we've thought through the legal issues. I mean, the mistakes people make when they hire a team just as contractors, or they're not paying attention to the legal requirements, they can make some big mistakes. So for example, we've seen companies that didn't get their IP on lockdown. So like the engineers are creating the IP and the company doesn't own it, things like that are like, it can be messy. And so I think it's more investment up front to make sure that you have the legal infrastructure in place, whether you set it up yourself or you do it through Globalization Partners. But yeah, because a lot of startups are using us just to access and leverage talent around the globe.
Good.
And it's either hiring good talent anywhere they can find it, or it's, as you mentioned, going into new markets. So the idea of being able to tackle the United States and Europe from day one and hire 1 or 2 salespeople everywhere is pretty compelling.
Yeah. And the economic model around it, because I'm sure people are thinking, it sounds fantastic, of course, the model. Is there you don't have to mention it now, and we can take the details for what you offer, or is the cost associated with doing this, because there's a speed advantage, right? Mm-hmm. I guess the economic model works in the favor of both parties, because it's expensive to do the legals, and then you make mistakes and so on and so forth. So tell us a little bit more about that if you can, because I think it's.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's hugely advantageous to the companies. It is. I think companies can be surprised, like if they were going to go set up the legal infrastructure overseas, for example. Or they hear, I can hire talent for $5,000 a year in India. Yeah, but like, come on, is that real? Like, you're going to have to set up a company in India and deal with all this stuff. And so basically that's not real. Those aren't real numbers. And so, but basically I think the us taking care of all the legal things, us having the international tax issues mostly flow through our company. All the legal, all the HR people on the ground in different countries, all the finance team, time and energy spent, and people to manage a global business, all of that compared to the market opportunity, sometimes lower cost of talent and the much greater market opportunity access, it is hands down super value add for the customer.
Got it. Makes sense. Sounds very, very exciting. Okay, we've got another question. Should I take that?
Go for it.
Yeah, so the questions come from Facebook. So we're casting on Facebook and on YouTube simultaneously. So you talked about the cultural differences amongst your different offices. Okay, how do you advise your clients to navigate those differences in terms of expectations on output? I guess this is related to micromanagement or do this. Do you have any juicy crash and burn stories related to cultural adjustments? Okay. I don't know who asked it, but thank you.
Give us the scoop here, Nicole.
Oh my God, do I ever. I mean, I would say I could literally write a book on this. And indeed, I do have a book coming out in next September with a big section on the cultural issues, because basically at times in my career, I felt like I am literally a cross-cultural coach. So yeah, I mean, big ones would be, the obvious ones would be like the Asian no is so completely radically different than the American version of no.
Wow.
And we've had times when like in Japan, just to give you an example, a Japanese accountant will say, that's difficult. What you're asking me to do is difficult. And the American hears, okay, it's going to take a little time and be expensive. And so they respond by email. Okay, tell me what it's going to take to get it done. And the Japanese accountant would come back and say, oh, very, very difficult. And to him, he's saying, no way, lady, you're completely insane. Just forget it. And then the American is like, oh man, this is going to cost me some money. Tell me what it takes to get it done. The Japanese person will stop responding, because to them, they've already said no twice. It would be rude to continue saying no. And then the American thinks that, not responding to email is the American professional crime number one. So
I'm being professionally ghosted.
Yes.
Right?
Yes. And so it's that type of thing. Another one, I think also, the little things, it's so little, but it's so important. Europeans, like, they really care about the relationship first, I've noticed. And like, if you just lob into an email and you're hey, I need you to do this or that. Okay, am I in trouble? Whereas most Europeans, they always say, oh, how are you? How's your family? This situation came up, blah, 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 blah. And we've actually even internally had to do some we do a lot of cross-cultural training with our team internally now, because basically the Europeans thought our entire American team were borderline personality disorder jerks, being bossy sometimes. And the Europeans were like, oh, what's going on here? That's an exaggeration, because our team gets along really well. But it was something that was surfacing that we just had to deal with and explain, like, just talk. And we had a good laugh over it.
Yeah.
I'm just appreciating how much you have to know around all the cultural sensitivities around the whole world, how things in Ecuador are going to be different than Venezuela, and et cetera, just all the little cultural nuances that are not so little that you have to keep smart about, and how they are changing as our world changes also, and technology and what have you. So just appreciating how much you have to have those people around you, but also for yourself. And that's like a nonstop, information intake with all of that.
Yeah. And I think that's the challenge, but it's also the fun and the joy of this type of work, is like how diverse we all are and how we all interact. And I think we've learned so much as Americans, I think knowing yourself. I'm an American, I should say. We are not. I think 70% of our workforce is outside the United States. But like how much we learn from other countries and cultures just by knowing who we are. So a few things about Americans: super direct. Time is of the essence. And so like when we speak, knowing this about myself, it's like we're straight to the point. We're considered polite if we're super on time and super direct without adding all those niceties. And that can be considered really rude in other countries and locations. Knowing that other people perceive that, we actually hired a community manager in our Boston office before the pandemic. Her job was literally to take some of the hospitality that we learned from our India and Mexico offices and Middle East offices and bring that to the United States. It was go pick people up at the airport, walk them to their hotel, make sure there's food waiting for them in their room, go to the hotel the next morning and walk them to the office and introduce them around to the team, figure out who they're having lunch with, because that type of thing is really important. And we were just so amazed by the generosity of hospitality and spirit that we Americans were greeted with around the globe. Whereas Americans thought we were being hospitable to say, oh, there's a really good taco stand down the street you should check out after work. It's just, and it's not wrong. It's just very different. And so we were like, wait, we want to show the love to our team members because we're excited we're here. And we learned a lot about that, from how to best do that for them. So it goes every direction, learning and giving.
It's quite interesting. One of the other observations is the relationship between home and work. And in different countries, in America, it's very different to Asia, for example. Home and work are intertwined, and working hours aren't the same because you start a little bit later and you have your 4 o'clock chai with your mates in India, for sure. I mean, that's like part of the culture. And, in the States, we're like, shit, I gotta go. I've got to leave at 5 o'clock. It's time to go. And you've got a bam, bam, bam productive day. And then you've got home life and you pick up the kids and you have some time with the kids, and then you go to sleep by whatever time. It's fascinating. I mean, the cultural differences are fascinating. I do think that the work that you're doing from an employment standpoint has... I'd love to see what your book's on, actually. And so when you do release it, tell us all about it. We'll post it out to our crew and our community. But I do think there is so much more that the work you're doing is actually enabling, which is... and especially after the pandemic, which is this massive opportunity to change the way people look at each other. And it talks to some of your points earlier on, but it is quite a serious issue because the world is divided. Populism is rising. The world is it's getting more divided. And we're not in the best place, not in the best health, at least in terms of our political views. So much dichotomy and bipolar thinking. And I think, Straight Talk Life was born to bring people together. It wasn't born to divide. It was born to unify. And unification is hard work. Division is easy. And so what you're doing is actually creating some form of collaboration and unification. So we admire that, of course. and would like to continue to support it, and we'll track your journey. And maybe you can help a lot of our community members as well, big companies and small companies, perhaps.
Would love to.
And with that, I'm just dying to know, what can you share about your upcoming book?
Oh, sure. I mean, it's basically a how-to guide of how to go global. Like where to find great talent. It's a very practical how-to guide from where to find talent, some of the cultural issues, some of the nuances in different countries. It's as much information as I could pack into one book of just having spent 20 years taking companies global in a tactical way, but also I'd say a lot of tactical, but also some of the just more nuanced cultural stuff that I think is helpful to know as well.
So this is going global in a virtual world now.
It's called Global Talent Unleashed. Is the name of the book. And you guys are the first person I've actually spoken to publicly about.
Great. So cool. And is it this September or next September?
This September.
This September.
Yeah, about 6 months from now.
Straight Talk Livers, you heard it here first.
Woo!
That's awesome.
Yeah. I hope it's a good, easy read too. And that any executive who's taking a company global, I think it would be helpful for anybody.
Fabulous. We expect a signed copy, please. Thank you.
And I just want to summarize, I'm just appreciating what I appreciate about this conversation is, and this is also true in my own life experience of working, living, traveling abroad in many different countries, is just how when you get exposed to all the different diversity perspectives and cultures that are out there, it really starts to get clear about human values and human characteristics and what's really underneath all of that we're really all wanting. We're all really wanting a lot of the same things at the end of the day around a healthy family, a healthy work life, something that a sense of meaning and purpose that we're engaged in. And I just see what you're doing and a lot of related technologies and companies are really, I think, evening the playing field in some healthy ways and really trying to help that talent be recognized and come forward and given opportunities to a lot of new people who wouldn't have had that otherwise.
Thank you.
So I really appreciate what you're doing here in leading the cause in your way. And Nicole, just out of curiosity, where can people find out more about you and your work? Where should they go?
Sure. So globalization-partners.com would be our company website. And in terms of me, I mean, I'm just on LinkedIn and a normal social media profile. I think people could Google me and come up with other podcasts and videos.
Okay, excellent. And of course, your new book is coming out. And say the title one more time.
Global Talent Unleashed. It's an executive's guide to going global.
Awesome. I'm looking forward to that.
Thank you.
Do you have any final words for our global audience?
Yes, I think that the more jobs that we have around the world in the United States, in any country and around the world, the better off we all are. And the work that we do to create and collaborate among cultures, whether those cultures are domestic or international, does indeed fit into the thing that you guys are talking about, uniting, not dividing. And there's amazing people all over the world that can be found, brilliant, bright, talented, great people all over the world. And I think there's so much more good in the world than bad. And tapping into that diversity is part of the joys of being part of this generation.
Wonderful.
Love it. That's a powerful note to end on. Nicole, thank you so much for your wisdom, your perspective, your passion, all that you do. Really appreciate it having you here on Straight Talk Live.
Thanks so much, guys. It was a pleasure to be here. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you. And just really quick for our episode, we're actually not going to be on the air next week. We get spring break too. So we're going to take next week off. But in 2 weeks, it's our 1 year anniversary of Straight Talk Live. So it's a very special episode. We want you to join us. It also is Earth Day. So it's April 22nd. And we have some amazing panel of young youth activists who are really making a difference in climate change from around the world. It's going to be a power-packed hour. So please join us. You're going to be hearing some very inspirational, real world stories that are happening right now. So please join us for our year anniversary special 2 weeks from now on the 22nd of April. Okay. Thank you all again. And all the straight talkers out there, go keep straight talking to those people around you and keep it real. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.